In September of last year, I sat down at the kitchen table at about 8 in the evening, with a glass of water and my laptop and the bank's online portal open in one tab and a blank spreadsheet in another, and I built the document I should have built in 2016. The river was audible through the back window. We are 4 kilometers from it, but in the evening silence it carries. And the mango tree outside was moving in the first of the cool season air. And I typed for 4 hours. And when I was done, I did not close the laptop immediately. I sat with it open, the total visible at the bottom of the final column, for about 20 minutes. And I want to say honestly that what I felt in those 20 minutes was not what I expected. I had expected anger or grief or the specific shame of a man who has been managed without knowing it. What I felt was closer to recognition, the feeling a teacher has when a student finally hands in the piece of work they have been avoiding, the work that will show what has actually been done and what has not. I built a spreadsheet. Not my first spreadsheet. I have been making spreadsheets since 1987 when I was deputy head at Roundhay and we got our first IBM compatible, but my first honest one. The distinction matters. I had built household budget spreadsheets for 8 years in this house, in Kanchanaburi, and they had all been technically accurate and practically useless. Because a spreadsheet that does not include a column for what you give to your wife's family is a spreadsheet about a smaller and more comfortable life than the one you are living. The spreadsheet I built in September was the one with all the columns. It took me about 4 hours, working from bank records going back to 2016. And when I finished, I sat with the total for a while before I showed it to anybody. And I will tell you what the total was. 8 years of marriage. 164 individual transfers that I could identify and attribute. 6.8 million baht. 147,000 pounds at the average exchange rate across the period. My name is Gordon. I am 72, from Leeds originally, and I have been a secondary school deputy head for 36 years. And the spreadsheet is the most important document I have produced in that career. And it is also, I think, the saddest, because it is the document that made the invisible visible at the exact moment when visibility no longer changes anything. I want to start with the wife position, because every man who hears these stories goes immediately to the wrong question, which is whether she was in on it. Preecha was not in on it. I want to say that with the clarity it deserves, because it is both the true answer and the most complicated one. She was not in on it in the sense of a plan, of a coordinated extraction, of family meetings at which my pension was discussed as a resource. What she was in on, what she is genuinely a part of, and has been since before I met her, is a structure. The structure is this. She is the eldest daughter of a family in Surin province. And in that structure, the eldest daughter carries certain obligations that are not negotiable and are not discussed, in the way that breathing is not negotiated and not discussed. She sends money to her mother. She responds to her brother's crises. She contributes to the ceremonies. She secures the education of the nieces and nephews who might otherwise not get it. These are not exceptional acts of generosity. They are the furniture of her life, and they were the furniture of her life before I appeared in it, and what my appearance added was a significantly larger budget. She did not change. The scale changed. I want any man listening who is currently thinking about his own version of this to hold that distinction carefully, because it is the difference between a swindle and a structure, and the two require completely different responses. And I spent about 3 years responding to a structure as though it were a swindle, and I was wrong about that. I retired from Roundhay in 2013, and I came to Thailand in 2015. I want to be brief about the reasons. Divorce in 2011, the children grown and scattered, an empty semi in Leeds that had started to feel like a waiting room rather than a home. And I want to be specific about the money, because the money is the spine of this recording. I should say something about the 1,200 mornings I spent in Leeds between the divorce and Thailand, because they explain the man who arrived at Kanchanaburi. I am 72. 66 is when I came. And for 20 months between leaving Roundhay and getting on the plane, I lived in a house I had bought at a discount from the settlement, a 3-bedroom Victorian terrace in Headingley, and I rattled around in it with notable efficiency. I cooked Monday to Thursday. I went to the pub on Friday. I walked the Meanwood Valley Trail on Saturdays, and I watched my grown son Daniel in Sheffield and my daughter Karen in Bristol get on with lives that included me once a month on the telephone and at Christmas, and whenever something went wrong and required a parent. These are not complaints. They are a fair accounting of what a retired deputy head with a decent pension looks like from the outside when he is doing perfectly well, and from the inside when he is using every skill his professional life gave him to maintain the appearance of not being lonely while being lonely at a significant depth. I did not go to Thailand to find a wife. I went to Thailand to find somewhere warmer to be the same man, and I found Preecha at a market stall, and the same man turned out not to survive the experience, which is either a failure or a success depending on how you measure it. I had £185,000. That is the number I arrived with, from the house sale and the pension lump sum, and 36 years of contributing to a Leeds City Council scheme that paid me, from 2013, about £1,640 a month, index-linked. I had done the arithmetic. In Thailand in 2015, that pension, at an exchange rate of 53 baht to the pound, was about 87,000 baht a month. A comfortable life in Kanchanaburi, rent, food, transport, the occasional long weekend away, cost perhaps 35,000. I had a surplus of more than 50,000 baht a month and savings of nearly 9 million baht, and I was 66 years old and healthy, and the arithmetic said I was fine. The arithmetic was correct about everything except the column it was missing. Preecha was 44 when I met her in 2016 at the Saturday morning market near the Death Railway Bridge, where she had a small stall selling Thai herbal sachets that her aunt made in Surin. I should account for Kanchanaburi itself, because it is not a place most people choose for retirement, and the reasons I chose it are part of the story. I had visited on a tour in 2015, 4 days, the bridge, the museum, the River Kwai in the evening, with the boats lit and the limestone hills behind. And what struck me was not the history, though the history is everywhere and weight-bearing, but the scale. It is a real town, not a tourist resort, not a beach destination, not the kind of place where the expat community is large enough to have a social hierarchy and a drama. There is a market, a proper one. There is a hospital. There are schools. There are monks at the temple at 6 in the morning, and motorcycles at 6:30, and the river all day, and the hills at evening, and a pace that would have bored the man I was at 45, and that suited the man I was at 66 precisely. I rented an apartment for 18 months to make sure, because I am a planner, and then I bought the house, and both decisions were correct. Kanchanaburi is where I will die, probably, and I mean that without drama. It is simply the place where my life has settled, and the settling is the right word for what has happened here. Not adventure, not escape, settling, like a house that has found its foundations. Preecha and I are settled together, which is a thing I did not believe at 66 I would be able to say at 72. The spreadsheet is part of the settlement now, not the threat to it. Preecha was 44 when I met her in 2016, at the Saturday morning market near the Death Railway Bridge. She had been in Kanchanaburi for 6 years at that point, divorced from a Thai husband in Bangkok, supporting herself and sending money home. I bought 3 sachets I did not need, and came back the next Saturday and bought 3 more, and she thought this was funny. She told me later she had assumed I was either very anxious or very taken with her herbal philosophy, and it was neither. I just didn't know how else to come back. And we talked for 40 minutes and I went home and thought about her for 3 days, which is how I knew it was serious, because I had not thought about anything for 3 days since Ofsted inspections. We married in 2018, at the Ampfer, small. Her family came up from Surin in a rented minibus, and her mother held my hands at the reception and said something to Preecha that Preecha translated as, "She says you have kind eyes," which I have since wondered about, but have decided to accept. The family is 5 people in Surin plus the extended network, and I want to describe them individually because making them a chorus is dishonest, and because each of them is a person, and the money I gave them went to real lives. Preecha's mother is 73. widowed, managing a small plot of land with cassava and a few ducks, and the sustained effort of a woman who has always done more than she needed to. Her health has been intermittent: joints, blood pressure, the diabetes that is endemic in the province, and the medical expenses have been real, and I do not begrudge a single baht of them. Her younger brother Lek is 48, not a bad man, not a lazy one, a man with bad luck in business, and the family characteristic of being unable to say clearly what he needs until the need is urgent, which means his requests always arrive as crises. His wife and 2 daughters live with the mother. The older sister Nong is 51, in Surin town, works at a school, married with 3 children including a son who wanted to study engineering, and who, with my help, studied engineering, and who qualified last year and is working in Kanchanaburi, and that is the line item I am proudest of and will not be taking back. There is an uncle on the mother's side who surfaces at ceremonies and whose connection to any specific request I have never been able to establish. And there is the network of cousins and neighbors and family friends who are not family in the legal sense and who are family in every other sense, and several of whom have at various points been included in things that came through Preecha to me as family obligations. And this is where the accounting becomes genuinely difficult, because I do not always know where the family ends and the community begins, and I am not sure Preecha always knows either. There is an uncle on the mother's side who surfaces at ceremonies, and whose connection to any specific request I have never been able to establish. And there is the network of cousins and neighbors and family friends who are not family in the legal sense and who are family in every other sense, and several of whom have at various points been included in things that came through Preecha to me as family obligations, and this is where the accounting becomes genuinely difficult, because I do not always know where the family ends and the community begins, and I am not sure Preecha always knows either. Let me tell you what the family has actually done with the money, because this is the part that the complaints skip and the part that matters most if you want to understand the structure rather than condemn it. The mother's land is better maintained than it was in 2018. I have seen it twice. The cassava rows are clear, the irrigation ditch that was broken when I first visited has been repaired, and there is a new corrugated iron water tank that replaced the broken concrete one. Lek's third business, the repair shop, has 4 regular customers among the local rice farmers and turns over perhaps 150,000 baht a year, which is not a profitable business by any analysis, but which is a man working, and I have seen what Lek looks like when he is not working, and it is worse. Nong's son sent Preecha a photograph when he got his first paycheck, a young man in a hard hat on a construction site in Kanchanaburi, grinning at the camera the way people grin when they have arrived somewhere they were not supposed to reach. And Preecha showed me the photograph at breakfast, and neither of us said anything, and I made a note in the spreadsheet under the engineering degree line that said, in brackets, worth it, and I mean it. These are the things the money bought. I am not going to pretend they are not real things. Now the spreadsheet. I want to go through the categories, because the categories are the honest way to hold this, and the honest way is the only one I have left. The house was the largest single item, and I want to account for it fully. In 2019, we bought a house in a development about 4 kilometers from the river, in Preecha's name because the land, as always in Thailand, cannot be in mine. 2,800,000 baht. I paid it. I did not feel coerced into it. I wanted a house because I was tired of renting, and because I believed, reasonably, that owning reduced our monthly costs. It did reduce our monthly costs. The house is also, legally, entirely hers, and I am living in it on the terms she permits. And I do not think I was wrong to buy it, and I do not think I was naive to buy it. And I know that when she and I finally have the conversation that is coming about what happens when I die, the house will be one of the things on the table. And I am not ready to have that conversation, but it is closer than it was. Monthly transfers to the mother's household. These began at 12,000 baht in 2018 and are at 19,000 now, having increased in 2020 when Lek lost his job in the tourism-adjacent business he'd been running, and in 2022 when the mother's blood pressure required regular medication, and in 2024 when electricity prices went up, and there was no single increase that I resisted or that seemed unreasonable at the time, and the total across 8 years from this line alone is about 1,380,000 baht. Monthly transfers to the mother's household. These began at 12,000 baht in 2018 and are at 19,000 now, having increased in 2020 when Lek lost his job in the tourism-adjacent business he'd been running, and in 2022 when the mother's blood pressure required regular medication, and in 2024 when electricity prices went up. And there was no single increase that I resisted or that seemed unreasonable at the time, and the total across 8 years from this line alone is about 1,380,000 baht. I want to stay on the increase mechanism because I think it is the most important and least discussed part of how this category works. None of the 7,000 baht increases arrived as a demand. They arrived as information: the medication, the electricity rate, the family's changed circumstances. And I responded to the information as a man with a surplus responds to it, which is to adjust the outflow upward. Each adjustment made sense in isolation. The 12,000 baht monthly I started in 2018 was a reasonable amount to send an elderly woman in a rural province. The 19,000 I send now is also reasonable, for a woman whose needs have increased with age and cost. What neither number looks like, standing alone, is a progression, and progressions, I have learned, are what you need to look at, not points. A monthly transfer that increases by 7,000 baht over 8 years is a 58% increase. A pension that increases by inflation over 8 years is perhaps 20%. The gap between those two rates is where the strain lives, and it did not arrive in a single month. It arrived one reasonable adjustment at a time, and by the time I built the spreadsheet, the gap was large enough to matter, and the pattern was old enough to have become structural. Lek's business ventures, 3 separate attempts. The first a small transport business with a second-hand truck, the second a food stall, the third a repair shop for agricultural equipment. Total invested across all 3, through Preecha, over 6 years, 740,000 baht. Of this, approximately 200,000 came back in the form of repayments on the first venture before the business ended. Net, 540,000. I want to note that Lek's repair shop, the third attempt, is still operating in a small way, and I choose to call that a result, even at 540,000 baht, because the alternative accounting is too bleak. Nong's son's engineering degree, 380,000 baht across 4 years. I have already said what I think about this. Medical expenses, all documented, all real, 420,000 baht. Ceremonies, weddings, funerals, ordinations, graduations, and the 2 occasions on which the family made merit at the temple with a generosity that reflected, in the community's eyes, on me specifically as the family's farang provider, 260,000 baht. This category is the one I find hardest to apportion blame about, because I attended most of these events. I sat at those tables. I received the ways and the warmth, and if I am being completely honest, I enjoyed being the good farang in those rooms. And that enjoyment was not free, and I paid for it, and I am not sure I paid too much. Miscellaneous. The column the spreadsheet labels honestly as things I cannot fully account for. Transfers that went to Preecha's personal account and that I know funded family things, and that I cannot always specify. 1,100,000 baht. This is the column that caused the longest silence at the kitchen table when I showed it to Preecha. She did not dispute it. She said, after a while, that she had not thought of it as a total because she had never added it up, and I believe her. And her not adding it up is a version of my not adding it up, and we are both responsible for the number, and the number is what it is. Total, 6.8 million baht. I want to return to the wife position question, because I have introduced it and I have not fully discharged it. There is a question that men in my situation are asked, usually by other men in similar situations, which is, did she marry you for the money? I want to answer it honestly, which means answering it at the level of complexity it deserves, rather than the level of simplicity it wants. Preecha married me for several reasons, of which the financial dimension was certainly one, and was certainly known to her, and was, I believe, factored into her decision in the way that a sensible adult factors realistic things into important decisions. She is the eldest daughter of a family in Surin. She is 52. She had been supporting that family alone on a market stall income for 6 years before I came along. I arrived with a pension and savings and a genuine affection for her that I was not hiding. The calculation she made, if calculation is even the right word for something that also involved, I am confident, genuine feeling, is not dishonest. It is the calculation of a person making the best decision available to her with the information she had, and that is what every person does. And the only difference between her calculation and mine is that I was not fully aware of all the inputs. What she brought to the marriage: 8 years of steady, warm, competent companionship. The terrace evenings. The ability to make a visiting son feel welcome. The patience to wait for me to have the spreadsheet conversation rather than forcing it. The honesty, when I had it, to say she hadn't known it was this much. These are not the contributions of a woman who married for money and is waiting for it to run out. They are the contributions of a woman who married with awareness of the financial context and who has, within that context, made a genuine life with me. I believe both of those things. I am going to keep believing them until I have specific evidence otherwise, and I have no specific evidence otherwise, and I have looked, because I am a planner, and planners look. The spreadsheet was the look. The total was large, and the life was real, and both of those things are in my September file. I showed her the spreadsheet 2 days after I built it. I want to describe that evening because it is the emotional center of this recording and the moment I am most asked about. We sat at the same kitchen table. I turned the laptop toward her and let her read. She read it twice, I think, in silence. She is a careful reader. And then she looked up and said one sentence. She said, "I didn't know it was this much." And I sat with that for about a minute, and then I asked her whether it would have changed anything if she had known, and she said she did not know, and that is the truest answer available to either of us, and I have decided to accept it as honest rather than evasive, because the alternative is to decide she was lying, and I have been married to this woman for 8 years, and I know the difference between her when she is lying and her when she genuinely does not know, and that evening she genuinely did not know. What I want to say about that moment, and I want to say it carefully because it is the most important thing in this recording, is that the conversation we had was not a confrontation, it was an audit. 2 people, sitting at a table, looking at a number together for the first time, and neither of us angry. She was, I thought, distressed, not defensive, distressed, in the way of someone who has been handed a picture of something she participated in without having seen it whole. And I was something I do not have a good word for. A combination of relieved that the number finally existed in the room between us, and frightened of what the number meant for the years we still have ahead of us, and oddly proud of the engineering degree, which kept surfacing in my mind as I looked at the totals. 380,000 baht and a boy from Surin is now working in Kanchanaburi. I cannot resolve those feelings. I am not sure they need resolving. The discussion about what changes took about 3 evenings. I want to be precise about what we agreed, because this recording is not useful if it ends at the accounting. The first evening I explained my position and she listened. I told her that I had been in this house for 8 years, contributing to her family's lives, without knowing the total, and that knowing the total had changed something, and that I wanted to change how we managed it going forward. She asked what I meant by manage, and I said I meant that requests above a certain amount would come to me before they were agreed, and that larger requests would require a plan, and that I wanted to understand what we were funding, and why, and for how long. She said, and this is what I respect about Preecha. She said that she understood, and that she had known this conversation was coming. I asked her when she had known. She said since 2022, when Lex's second business failed. She had known then that we were at the edge of what I could absorb without noticing, and she had been waiting for me to notice rather than raising it herself, and I sat with that for a long time, because it means she was protecting me from the knowledge in the same way I had been failing to seek it, and we had both been doing the other person the wrong kindness. The second evening we went through the categories together, which was the hardest conversation of our marriage. Not because of the numbers. She accepted the numbers without argument, and she was right that some of them were larger than she had realized. But because of the question of what the numbers meant about us, whether the marriage and the family economics were separate things or the same thing, whether the structure she came from, and that I had been funding, was the context for the marriage, or part of it, or the purpose of it. I do not have a clean answer to any of those questions, and she did not offer one, and I think the not offering was honest. The third evening we agreed the structure. The mother's monthly transfer stays at 19,000 because the woman is 73 with diabetes, and I am not the kind of man who withdraws medical support from an old woman. We reviewed it. It will stay. The threshold for future family requests. We agreed, and this was not easy, and it was not a single conversation, that requests above 30,000 baht come to me before they are agreed to, and that requests above 100,000 baht require a proper discussion with a plan and a timeline, and where possible, a repayment schedule. I told Preecha that this was not distrust of her family. I told her it was arithmetic. I told her that I am 72 years old and that at some point the pension is the only income and that managing the pension requires managing what the pension serves. And she listened to all of this with the patience of a woman who had known this conversation was coming for longer than I had. The new structure has been in place for 8 months. It has been tested twice, once by Lek, once by a cousin I had not previously met who needed help with a motorbike, and it held both times. The holding felt like an achievement out of all proportion to the thing, which probably tells you how long I had been not holding. I said no for the first time in the second test, for the cousin. Preecha brought the request. She handles the family communications, as she always has. And I said, gently and clearly, that I was not going to contribute to someone I had never met for a purpose I didn't fully understand, and that if the cousin needed help, there were other avenues, and I told her what they were. Specifically, because I researched them before having the conversation, because I am a deputy head, and deputy heads do not walk into difficult conversations without material. Preecha was quiet for a moment, and then she nodded and said she would explain it, and she did, and the cousin did not respond well, and I was in a different room when Preecha took the call, and I heard the tone of it through the wall. Not the words, the tone, and it was uncomfortable. And when she came in afterward, I asked whether she was all right, and she said yes, in the way that means the conversation cost her something. I made her a cup of tea. She drank it. She did not mention the cousin again. That night I sat on the terrace and thought about the word generous. I had always thought of generosity as a clean thing, a flow outward from surplus, given freely, costing nothing important. What I understood on the terrace, in the dark, in the way that things become clear at 72, that were not clear at 66, is that generosity without awareness is not generosity. It is a void that fills. The requests I had been receiving for 8 years were not unreasonable, because the people making them were not unreasonable. They were people in ordinary need of things I could genuinely afford to give. But the filling of a void has no natural limit, and the limit has to be supplied from outside the void. And the limit is the spreadsheet, and I should have built it in 2016 and I did not, and I cannot recover the difference between 2016 and 2024, and I have decided that I am going to spend whatever is left of my time here living with the spreadsheet open. I want to tell you about the terrace, because this recording has been very full of numbers, and the terrace is not a number. My son Daniel visited in 2022, 4 days, his first time in Thailand, and, I suspect, a fact-finding mission dressed as a holiday, because Daniel is an accountant in Sheffield, and accountants find facts. He was pleasant and careful, and he asked me, on the second evening on that same terrace, whether I was happy, and I said yes, with the conviction of a man who has prepared for the question, and he nodded and said, good, and we watched the hills go dark together, and he did not ask about money, and I did not raise it. I had been sending him and Karen abbreviated summaries of my financial situation at Christmas for several years, not because they asked, but because I am a planner and planners document. And the summaries had been accurate about everything except the family drain column, which I had managed by categorizing it as household and community expenses, and leaving it at that level. I am going to send Daniel the real version of the spreadsheet when this recording is released, because I have decided that the people who love me should have the actual numbers rather than the comfortable version. And because I am 72 and the time for comfortable versions is getting shorter, he will be concerned. He will offer to help in the careful way he offers things. I will tell him the structure is in place, and that the spreadsheet is current, and that the engineering degree entry says, in brackets, worth it, and I think that will be enough. Karen has not asked. Karen never asks, because Karen understood when she was about 11 that I was more comfortable being asked questions I had prepared answers for than questions that arrived without warning, and she has spent 37 years giving me the gift of her patience, and I hope I have given her enough of my attention in return, and I am not certain I have. I want to tell you about the terrace, because this recording has been very full of numbers, and the terrace is not a number. It is a wooden deck behind the house, 6 planks wide, with a mango tree that drops fruit in June, and a view of the hills to the west, that in the evening, when the light is going, looks like something I would have driven 3 hours to see from Leeds, and that I see every day without driving anywhere. Preecha and I sit out there most evenings with tea, and sometimes we talk and sometimes we do not, and the not talking is the same companionable silence it has always been, and it is the best evidence I have that the spreadsheet did not break us. I worry about things. I worry about the exchange rate. The pound has lost about 12% against the baht since I arrived, and that 12% has a name in my monthly column, and the name is not good. I worry about what happens after I go, because I am 72, and the question of after is no longer theoretical. I worry about Lex Repair Shop. I do not worry about Preecha, because she is the most capable person I know, and she will be fine. And whether my pension died the finest thing I did with my retirement years, or the most expensive thing I failed to manage, is a question I have decided to hold in both hands rather than force into one. I worry about things. I worry about the exchange rate. The pound has lost about 12% against the baht since I arrived, and that 12% has a name in my monthly column, and the name is not good. I want to be specific about the exchange rate worry, because it is the background worry that no spreadsheet can fully address, and that I think every British retiree in Thailand carries somewhere under the other worries. In 2015, a pound bought 53 baht. It buys 46 now. That is not a catastrophe if you have savings. It is a slow pressure if you are living on a pension, because the pension is fixed in pounds and the costs are in baht, and the gap between the two currencies has been moving, quietly and relentlessly, in the wrong direction for 9 years. I have modeled it, as a planner models things, at current trends. By the time I am 78, the pension's baht value will have declined to approximately 80,000 baht from the 87,000 I arrived with. That is still adequate. It is less comfortable than it was. The mother's monthly transfer, fixed in baht, becomes a larger proportion of a declining pound income every year, and the new structure, the threshold, the plan requirement, is partly a response to the maths of that trajectory as well as to the spreadsheet. I do not talk about this with Preecha, because she cannot affect it, and worrying alongside me would cost her something without giving her anything, and that is the one kind of economy I practice freely. I worry about what happens after I go, because I am 72, and the question of after is no longer theoretical. I have a will. It was made in Leeds in 2015, and it names Daniel and Karen as my estate's beneficiaries. And the estate is now approximately £42,000 in savings, plus the pension, which stops with me, plus any claim I might have against the house, which is legally none, and practically the subject of the conversation I have been putting off. I need to update the will, and I need to have the conversation. And I have been a deputy head for 36 years, and I know that putting off difficult conversations is always more expensive than having them, and I am putting it off, and I will stop putting it off in January. I am writing that down in this recording so that it exists somewhere other than my own intention, which has a history of losing to the morning coffee, and the terrace, and the argument that it can wait another week. The spreadsheet is still on my desktop. I update it on the 1st of every month, which takes about 15 minutes. The column headings have not changed. The 1st of next month will add another entry in the mother's row, 19,000 baht, which I will transfer before breakfast, as I have every month for 8 years, because the woman is 73 and she has diabetes, and her cassava patch is not enough. And whatever else this recording is, it is not the recording of a man who is going to stop that. Everything else, every request above the threshold, every new name, every crisis that requires a number larger than I can absorb without noticing, goes through the structure we built at the kitchen table in September. Not perfectly, better than before. For a deputy head of 36 years, better than before is the standard I have learned to accept, which is either wisdom or defeat, and I have decided it does not matter which. Let me end with the practical things, because this has been a recording about a number, and the number deserves a practical ending. The spreadsheet itself, 4 columns: date, amount, recipient, category. Category has 6 values: mother's household, brother's ventures, education, medical, ceremonies, other. The other column is the honest column, the one where I put the things I cannot quite label, and its contents are the most useful things in the whole file, because they show the true shape of the giving, rather than the sanitized shape. I update it on the 1st of every month, and I show it to Preecha twice a year, April and October, not as an audit, but as a shared document, which is what it should have been in 2016, and which it is now. The threshold conversation, have it before you need to have it, rather than when you already need to have it, which is when I had it, at 72. The specific numbers Preecha and I agreed, 30,000 and 100,000 baht, are not the right numbers for everyone. The right numbers are high enough that ordinary family business passes through without friction, and low enough that the discussions you do have are the important ones. A threshold that catches everything is a toll booth, and it will exhaust you both. A threshold that catches nothing is what I had for 8 years. The useful thing is in the middle, and the middle requires you to know your outflow, and you cannot know your outflow without looking at 8 years of bank records on a September evening, and that evening is a difficult one, and I am telling you to have it now, while the total is still a size you can manage rather than a size you can only account for. And tell your children in England, not the number, necessarily, the shape. Not because they can change anything, but because a father who is transparent about his finances does his children the service of not having them discover the full picture at the moment they are also grieving, which is the worst possible moment for a discovery of any kind, and which is the moment at which most of these discoveries are made. I am sending Daniel the spreadsheet in January. I have promised myself this in a recording, which is the closest thing I have to a binding commitment. The spreadsheet is still on my desktop. It will be there tomorrow morning when I make the coffee, and it will be there on the 1st of next month when I transfer the mother's 19,000 baht, and it will be there for however many months remain in which I sit at this kitchen table in Kanchanaburi, doing the only accounting that has ever really mattered, which is not the total outflow but the total of what the outflow built, both of them, the column of what went out and the column of what it built, and the difference between a man who has one and a man who has both is the difference between an audit and a life. The engineering degree in Kanchanaburi, the repaired irrigation ditch, the repair shop that turns over 150,000 baht a year to a man who needs to be working, the conversations on the terrace in the dark, with a woman who knew the spreadsheet conversation was coming and waited for me to be ready for it, the cassava plot that is better maintained than it was. These are in the spreadsheet too, in the column I label worth it, and they are not small items. And they are not the items the channel wants me to talk about, and I am talking about them anyway, because the accounting is not complete without them, and an incomplete accounting is how we got here in the first place, and I am not going to end a recording about a spreadsheet by leaving a column out, because a man who is 72 and has been a deputy head for 36 years has learned, eventually, that the ledger with only one column is not an honest one.